Good afternoon. My name is Bill Modro. I am the head of Special Collections and University Archives here at Miami University, and I'd like to welcome everyone to our lecture series celebrating Black History Month. With today's presentation, the Reemergence of Protest and Marches in America. Before introducing our panelists, I would like to recognize our co-sponsors, the National Underground Railroad Freedom Center, the 100 Black Men of America Tallahassee chapter, the Office of Institutional Diversity at Miami University. On behalf of Miami University's Libraries Dean Jerome Connolly, I want to thank them for their support. I also want to thank all the staff who helped organize this presentation, and also thank Jackie Johnson, University Archivist, for planning this series. Now I'm excited to introduce our panelists. Christopher J. Miller is an accomplished museum professional with more than 15 years of public history and museum experience. Mr. Miller is the Senior Director of Education and Community Engagement at National Underground Railroad Museum Freedom Center in Cincinnati, Ohio. His areas of expertise include historical research and interpretation, project management, and public program development. Mr. Miller makes his leadership role in directing initiatives that build public awareness of African American history and advancing initiatives related to social justice, community empowerment, implicit bias, human trafficking, and cultural competency. Regular appearing on local media as a contributor, Mr. Miller aptly shares his breadth of knowledge to address topics from race relations to historical milestones, cultural concerns from incidents to hate, and the integration of innovative approaches to academics. Beyond offering his perspective through media appearances, Mr. Miller is an adjunct professor of history at the Xavier University in Cincinnati, Ohio. Mr. Miller earned his MA in Public History and his BA in English from Northern Kentucky University. Before graduating cum laude from Northern Kentucky University, Mr. Miller earned a fellowship with the Institute of Freedom Studies, where he served as a research assistant decoding antebellum runaway slave ads. He assisted in developing a comprehensive database from primary source documents highlighting the attempts of enslaved persons to free themselves from state-sanctioned enslavement. Mr. Miller has a passion of African American history and understands its authentic value within the narrative of humanity. Our next panelist is Dr. Anthony James Jr., who is an associate professor in the Department of Family Science and Social Work. He's the director of the Family Science Program and interim vice president for institutional diversity at Miami University. His scholarly work uses an interdisciplinary approach to understanding social interactions and human development, with an expertise in positive youth development, religion, and spirituality, diverse family systems, family processes, and program evaluation. Dr. James is the editor-in-chief of Marriage and Family Review. Our third panelist is Dr. Jarrett Terry. He's an assistant vice president for academic affairs at the Florida State University with responsibilities that include centers and institutes, research continuity, corporate and community engagement, and space utilization. He currently serves on several committees, including the FSU's President's Task Force on Diversity, Inclusion, and Anti-Racism, the Atlantic Coast Conference Academic Leadership, and FSU's team on National Alliance for Inclusive and Diverse STEM Faculty, Aspire. This participation demonstrates his passion towards resolving those issues of equity, inclusion, diversity that impact the successes of underrepresented minority populations in higher education. Just prior to his appointment, Dr. Terry had served as an assistant vice president for extended programs in academic affairs at Clayton State University. In that role, he was responsible for the oversight of university's continuing education program, study abroad, academic and community engagement partnerships, dual enrollment, and a host of other responsibilities within academic outreach. The majority of attention was directed towards community and higher education partnerships, management and higher education, with an emphasis on faculty and student development through community-based applied learning, STEM program development, study abroad program developing, and continuing education. He's worked in the field of higher education for over 10 years. In addition to his service in the Office of Academic Affairs in Clayton State, he served as an assistant dean and engineering faculty member, coordinator for several outreach programs. Additionally, he has served as faculty senator, a member of several science, technology, and engineering, math and mathematics, STEM grant advisory boards, and as a principal investigator of the Georgia Board of Regents sponsored grant. Prior to 2006, Dr. Terry worked as an engineer in well-known industries while continuing his education towards a terminal degree in mechanical engineering. Dr. Terry holds a doctorate in higher education management from the University of Georgia Institute of Higher Education and both Bachelor and Master of Science degrees in mechanical engineering from Southern Illinois University. His specialties are community targeted academic engagement, STEM outreach and recruitment, minority outreach, specifically towards STEM disciples, predictive analytics and student success, faculty and student development, and academic partnership development. And he also is a mentor with the 100 Black Men of the, sorry, I don't want to mess that up. The 100 Black Men of America, Tallahassee chapter. Mr. Miller, I turn it over to you.
Thank you, Bill. I would like to thank the leadership at Miami University for this opportunity. In Dr. Parenza Cole's book, American Founders, she reveals how Black Americans are the key architects in the development of American democracy. I would go further and say Black men and women have been the champions of American democracy, justice, and equity. How has systemic injustice been confronted? With protests and marches. The Underground Railroad was a social justice movement that gave breath to the period of Reconstruction that would fail, but gave breath to the Niagara movement, which was the precursor to the NAACP. In the summer of 1917, the strategy of moderate protests and marches was birthed. In the midst of the nadir of American race relations, racial tensions burned hot in communities across the nation. Under the leadership of James Weldon Johnson, the NAACP organized a silent protest march along Fifth Avenue in New York City in response to the racial violence against Black Americans. Imagine children at the front, in line and marching, followed by women in white dresses, followed by men in dark suits. They carried banners and posters stating their reasons for protesting. Imagine nearly 10,000 Black men, women, and children. There were no chants, no songs, just silence and the beat of a drum. We may call the recent protests and marches a reemergence, but these exhibitions of civil unrest have been critical instruments for change within our culture and tradition. I'm so glad to be here with this wonderful panel with Dr. Terry as well as Dr. James. And so without further ado, I would love for us to get into this outstanding conversation. And I have an opening question. I'll begin with Dr. James, and I definitely would like to hear from Dr. Terry as well. Dr. James, when did you first learn about protests and marches? And what is your current perspective on the recent protests and marches?
Yeah, thanks for that question. Thanks for having me on a panel. I certainly appreciate being here. As far as protests, and probably as a young child, my dad, introduced me to freedom fighters. I traveled to the Million Man March with my dad. It's one of the highlights of my youth. I learned a lot. I have rarely been in spaces of Blackness like that, that touched me in that way. And it spoke to what I believe my dad was trying to instill into me, which was to care about our fellow person. I was about to say man, but I will make sure I'm inclusive here and say our fellow people, our fellow humans, right? And my dad told me about my grandfather who marched with Dr. King when he marched through, I believe, Cicero, a place that wasn't very welcoming to Black and brown individuals and their families. And they had some individuals in that community had some very specific ways in which they tried to keep out others. And so that was my sort of youth of learning about, protests and riots. And of course, this isn't something that's new. America's history is full of protests and riots. It's foundational to the rules of our game, our Constitution. that when we feel displeasure, frustration, a sense of something isn't right, that we have that freedom of speech to speak out on it. Unfortunately, things haven't always been equal for everyone in this country. And so that creates moments. It creates inequalities that further strengthen the frustrations, foments the sense of this isn't right. And if we think back to what happened last summer, it was fascinating in that many of us were already frustrated due to the ecological conditions of a pandemic. Um, I think I saw a story about a lady who was in her maybe early hundreds who was alive during the 1918 pandemic. I think it was 1918. Like one of the few people. So I say that only to say that many of us had no clue what it would be like to have the world shut down the way it did. To be reminded of the human function of being social, of being connected to others in our communities. And that was frustrating. It was depressing in some ways. It was difficult. And then you had layered on top of that these events that have happened over history, you know, the Breonna Taylor, Ahmad, I forget his last name, I'm sorry. And is it Aubrey, I believe?
Yes, yes,
Aubrey,
Aubrey.
sorry. And then, of course, we witnessed the absolutely stomach-churning death of George Floyd. And I think that was the spark that just flamed this frustration. And I ultimately am a researcher. That's where I sit in terms of my comfort, what I feel I can add, my ability to look at complex systems and say, this is what appears to be happening. And one of my first questions, so much so that I wrote this up and shared it with my mentor, and I hope that we one day publish it. I was looking on social media and looking at the different news reports, and so many things were being said about what's going on. And what it touched on for me was, are we making some critically flawed assumptions about how people feel, why they're marching, why they're frustrated, what they want out of their speaking out? And I wasn't sure, and I'm still not sure because there are so many things. And it reminded me of a project that I've co-led with my friend and colleague, Valerie Robinson Carmichael here at Miami University, the Truth and Reconciliation project, where we've taken students down to the Equal Justice Initiative and looked at the National Memorial for Peace and Justice, also known as the Lynching Memorial. We also were in a space that was the heart of the civil rights movement. And we learned about the absolutely solidified approach of the Montgomery bus boycott and how long it was. And I don't think I fully recognized how powerful that must have been for a group of people whose skin looks like mine to come together and say, we don't like the way they treat us. And so we're going to together make sure we cripple that until they bring about change. And it's one thing to hear it, it's another thing to go down there in that space and see it, to walk the streets, to feel something different there of how they did that and with so many people, and to have this coordinated effort. Similarly, in Cincinnati here, we came up because we had the riot in what, the 2001, I believe, or was it 3? And we had the collaborative agreement. And so I bring up these two instances, the collaborative agreement from the riots, from the Tyrone, I forget his second last name, I'm sorry, I apologize. And the Montgomery bus boycott, is that the leaders of these marches were clear about what they desired and what they wanted. And because they were clear, they were able to harness that critical mass of people who were frustrated and direct them towards some given outcome. And they've seen that, and now they can go forward in trying to make changes in particular areas in which they see the system isn't set up to be fair. The system isn't set up to allow them to reach their potential, whether we're talking about at the individual, community, or state level. And that's important, I think, is that when we have these sorts of incidents or riots or protests, that leaders rise up and articulate a clear direction and goal so that it's not for naught, that people can see that they've moved the needle, that they've engaged the community in a way that says it's going to be different going forward. And I'll stop there and pass the mic, so to speak.
Thank you, Dr. James. And same to you, Dr. Terry, if you can expound upon your early lessons of learning about, I would say, protests and marches, and your perspective on the protests that have taken place in our nation.
So I'll spend very little time on the exposure, but give a difference. And first of all, let me thank you, Mr. Miller and Dr. James and Mr. Madro for going through that lengthy introduction. I appreciate you weathering that, as it were, and committee. Thanks for the invitation. I would say what's interesting about my exposure is, as an elementary school student, the first march I actually witnessed or was made aware of was a Klan march. So different from a different perspective. I'm in a smaller town. I'm in the St. Louis area, which is geographically about the same latitude, but in a different location. What I will say is that we were very aware of the efforts of Black Panther Party in and around the St. Louis area and some other things, but these were on TV, by news, or by word of mouth. Again, my experience of actually being in and around one in my town was not more about from the perspective of what we're talking about today, which seemingly is a social injustice from the perspective that it was only Black people or only poor people who were trying to do this, but it was American for us, as was stated by Dr. James earlier, with the Revolutionary War. These were protests, these were marches, these were going against an establishment or the way that things were that maybe were not fair to a certain group. Later, we heard in history books and on those old films that went tick, 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 tick. I'm a little bit older, but we were able to see in those films what was going on in the South. And again, I'm right there in the middle of the country. So when I say South, it's right down the street for us. I think it's interesting now to see that we're still at this unfair perspective, or I should say unbalanced, unequal perspective of when people feel as if they want to make a change, it's right for some and it's not right for others. We also saw that when it came to unions marching. I'm in a town that is factory driven in and around, and so I was very familiar with unions protesting outside or striking. I find these to be in somewhat ways, without having the educational background, similar in the sense that there's just it's a mechanism to try to create change, and something very democratic, something very American to do. So again, I just wanted to add that perspective. What it is that I'm seeing now as the current perspective is largely that. It's that people are now able to see, and someone had asked earlier, how does, or we had discussed earlier, how has social media added to this and some other things. I won't get into that conversation yet, but I will say that with the exposure of some of the social injustices, some of the inequity, some of the inequality, being able to be streamed and seen. You can go as far back as the Rodney King incident, and you can go to the thing, with George Floyd today. When you see those kind of things over and over and over again, eventually you cannot ignore it. And when you cannot ignore it, that's when there are enough people, there's a critical mass of people who say, we at least need to discuss it, and we need to bring it to the attention of many. And in some ways, it's going to be a march and or a protest. I think this is just, despite sometimes what happens on the fringe, it is a healthy way by which to bring attention to some of the injustices we see.
Thank you, Dr. Terry. I would agree. I remember when you started off talking about the Klan. I remember I moved to Cincinnati in '98. And I remember at that particular time in Cincinnati, Ohio, the Klan was still marching to Fountain Square to put up a cross. And we're talking about not that long ago, 1998. And I was astounded that, you know, being new to the city, that this was something that was normal practice, even into the 90s. And so I can definitely relate to that. Dr. James, when you look over the extensive, as far as when we do the research and look at marches and tests, what are the intended objectives in most of these marches and protests that are taking place?
Thanks for that. Again, going back to my approach, and one thing, if you've been around any faculty, is we're shameless. We shamelessly plug our things. So I have an upcoming book about engaging and doing DEI work, diversity, equity, and inclusion. And I lay out a model for engaging this type of work. And one of those steps is simply to articulate what those outcomes are. So given that, and given my cautious nature of speaking for others, as opposed to allowing myself to hear what they're trying to tell me, what I saw was a lot of Black Lives Matter shift to the forefront, not just here in the States, but abroad. Now, I can't say for sure what those individuals meant for Black Lives Matter, but what I do know is that Black Lives Matter has a website, and I know that my one of my assistants is on here, so she'll link it. They have a website that lays out what their ideals are, how they see fairness being played out for Black people, other people of color. So I know we have a new term, BIPOC, Black Indigenous people of color. And I would assume that this is what people were saying, is that we have some concerns, some frustrations about how law enforcement is carried out. And as Dr. Terry said, let's at least have the conversation. And because we aren't having that conversation regularly, now we have to take it to the streets and let you hear and feel our frustrations. Now, unfortunately, there are some consequences of that that can be negative for neighborhoods, with looting, with scaring away businesses. And those have some long-term effects that we'll probably get into a little bit later. But it's fair to also talk about that, that, hey, we want to articulate these concerns. We want to put together some sort of agreement, kind of like the collaborative agreement. And then we want some accountability around these things. Can we check up to see if we're actually getting closer to what we asked for, so that this does allow us to, you know, pursue life, liberty, and happiness, right? So I would go with that approach. And as I said, I absolutely adore Simran. She put it in the chat. So if you've never been on their site, I would encourage you to go on their website and see what they have to say about what the frustrations are. And before I pass the mic, let me make sure I say, I realize there's a political aspect to saying Black Lives Matter. That's why some people hesitate, because people use that phrase in all sorts of ways. But because of who I am, I want to listen to what the founders of it said. And this is what they said. So I would encourage everyone to read it. And then you can make your decision about whether or not you see that as problematic or somehow taken away from the humanity of others. I will say that I don't. I think it's in addition to others.
Thank you, Dr. James. And never be ashamed to provide a resource, because that's what it is. You're providing resources for us to grow. So never be ashamed to do that. As you can see over my shoulder, I have plenty of resources that I go to time and time again. I would like to shift the conversation a little bit to how Black men show up and show out. I want to talk a little bit about the 100 Black men. From what I've learned, the overall concept of the 100 began in 1963 in New York City, when a group of concerned African-American men began to meet to explore ways of improving conditions in their community. These visionaries included businessmen and industry leaders such as David Dinkins, Robert Mangum, Dr. William Haling, Nathaniel Goldston III, Livingston Wingate, Andrew Hatcher, and Jackie Robinson. And so, Dr. Terry, I'm sorry, what does the 100 Black Men look like today? And what kind of work is being done from your perspective? Dr. Terry?
So I appreciate the opportunity actually to talk about the 100 because again, it's near and dear to my heart. You had mentioned that we started in 1963 in New York and eventually moved into DC and tried to kind of move across the country to help African-American families in a variety of areas. I just wanted to state that when this started, it eventually moved into Alton, Illinois, which is where I'm from, near the St. Louis area. My father actually participated in the 100 Black Men that was established again in 1989. And so as a young man, I grew up seeing my dad out in the community working. And that's what 100 Black Men is really about. It's providing mentorship with a focus on health and wellness, economic empowerment, and education. My entire family is in higher education because those kinds of ideals were instilled upon us through the community action, social interaction of particularly African-American families trying to do better and trying to make it. So as many of you may know, or you may not know, the 100 Black Men is an international entity. And so we have chapters in England and Africa and the Caribbean islands, wherever there seems to be social injustice for Black people, actually. We certainly are there to assist. I think what you will find, though, is that we have a very focused strategy, one that has been vetted. And that's why I mentioned all this, to show that the commitment is about legacy and continuing to give back. And so when we work to improve the next one. So what that means is we are in the schools, we are in the churches. You'll see us in the parks. You'll see us walking in and out of the stores, looking for young men and young women who may need guidance, may want advice. You'll see us coaching. You'll see us trying to make sure that the history is not forgotten, but instead the future is made brighter by that foundation and that background. Right now, we would have had to move. We had to move with the ages, as it were. And so we've embraced technology, and we've had to embrace technology in part because of the pandemic. You know, the work did not stop because of COVID. It is a serious issue that further isolated so many people, so many families, so many communities. And we had to choose strategies that allowed us to take on the online technologies that exist. You don't necessarily need to name out the companies. You all had to endure them over and over and over again in your classes. So, but we are very thankful for those companies, I will say, and we try to find opportunities for our young people to engage with those companies because we see that that is the future. And there are a variety of Fortune 500 companies in which 100 have members. Those members continue to mentor, as I said, trying to help people navigate how to move in and about with goals of being successful, trying to be financially literate, trying to understand how management styles work, how to deal with the issues that they deal with at home, but still be productive, not only as citizens in their own communities, but in their workplace so that they can gain more and better opportunities. You'll also find that we're in the school system, whether it be K through 12 or K through 20, as some of us like to say, where we understand that it's about network. It's about having a community of support of people like you and unlike you that understand how and why the world works. And if you can do that and you can participate in that and you can not only learn the language, but be able to navigate and move through successfully the challenges and barriers that are set up for people who are different, period. People who are different, you have a better chance of impacting someone else's life in a very, very positive way. And so again, you know, we're still here in the churches. We're still here in businesses and industries that you see. We're still in the parks. We're still in the schools. You'll see us in food drives. You'll see us trying to help people get to the polls. You'll see us trying to help people get employed, and trying to find people with clothing drives, with you know, the kind of preparation in terms of etiquette, taking, you know, you might find it as something that is not as significant, but trying to find opportunities for people to play golf, simply because these are those pathways by which people have determined that there is a potential for success. So I think that's, and if you can continue that legacy by an each one help one, or an each one reach one has been coined in a number of different organizations, you'll find that that there's success in that strategy. Black Lives Matter will be one of those. And it is made of people who have learned and know that there are successful best practices, as they say, that can move the needle with regards to social justice and equity and opportunity.
Thank you very much. Powerful, meaning work that's being done by 100 Black men, most certainly. I want to encourage attendees to please feel free to post any comments or questions in the chat, and we'll do our best to get to those comments and questions with the allotted time. There is one question that I would like to ask, because you brought up technology. And so I want to, and this is for both, not just Dr. Terry, but also Dr. James. How do you see social media and technology advancements both helping or hindering the evolution of peaceful protesting? I know we touched on it a little bit, but I want to dive a little bit deeper on your perspectives on that.
I can go first, and then I'll pass it over to Dr. Terry. I think, like with many things, it's a tool. And any tool can be a blessing or a curse. It can be a blessing in that it can help you get your message out. It can help you build your platform, find folks who agree with the frustrations. It can maybe increase access to decision makers who can ease the uncomfort or discomfort that is being felt by individuals and communities. But it can also be a vacuum that can promote things that aren't true. It can be a vacuum that can be a bully platform. It can be a platform that cancels out meaningful voices that should be a part of the conversation, and, you know, and so forth and so on. So I think it's important for us to embrace this tool. But also, like anything else, you know, if I, you know, were to use the saw that's in my garage, it comes with a set of instructions, right? You probably shouldn't put your finger there while you're trying to make this cut, because that may not feel so comfortable. The same is true for social media, that prudence is okay to wait and see if what you're saying has some truth to it. It is okay to listen to others so that you can understand the nuance in why systems are set up the way they are, and the extent to which we can change them to really improve the lives and opportunities of all people, and not cherry picking. Hopefully that's not a derogatory term, you know, one over the other based on our own biases, because we all have them. And so we have to use this tool like we use any other tool, with care and caution, but also to its full power, so that we can get those desired outcomes that we hope for. No, I'll pass it.
I see it very similar as an analogy. I'll say I see it very similar to a skateboard, and in that, you know, a skateboard is a valuable mechanism to get from one place to another. It's extremely efficient, but if you don't know how to ride it, it's going to be a problem for you. You know, I've rolled over many a finger and broken a nail trying to sit down to learn. I've got a son who's doing the same thing, which kind of gave me this perspective. I was just thinking, and if you're going way downhill as fast as you possibly can and you don't know how to stop, it's going to be trouble. I say that to say that we are very young with this technology. We've not really understood all of the capacity, but all of the limitations. And I'm going to speak a little bit quickly on some of the limitations. There's a lack of humanity right now. It's not that that humanity can't be, and I mean within the technology, it's not that that can't be there. It's just we don't know how to pull that humanity out appropriately. And I say that to say we can make a statement in venting that one is taken out of context in many cases, or we really were just venting and was hoping nobody saw it. And so as people to people, we have a trusting relationship with people around us that we feel comfortable being able to vent with in some cases. And in other cases, we would not have said it. And so I think that is an immaturity that we have with the technology that makes this tool hard to use. I'm not going to say dangerous. I'm going to say hard to use, because when that information moves so quickly to the others, and as we know, it moves with perception and perspective that guides the message. Sometimes the message is clear on, and sometimes it is not. It is intended and it is unintended. So I think it's just something we need to be very cautious about. We often mentor young people. Once you put it up there, you have to know that not only is it up there for everyone to see, but you don't have control over the message that it delivers. Your intention doesn't go with it at all times. And that's why you should be extremely careful and versed and prepared, educated on how to use these systems. But they're very, very valuable if used in the right way to help people to understand what's going on and why it is important to address positively or negatively the content in the message.
I agree 100%. I think there are several examples of how the technology can be manipulated to present a false narrative, and to provoke consequences that may take months, if not years, to remedy. So absolutely, there comes a great deal of responsibility when using the technology. And we have quite a few questions coming through the chat, and I will address that. But I want to definitely get to this one question, because this is Black History Month. And this is the origins of this goes back to Carter G. Woodson, who is considered the father of Black history. In 1926, it started out with Negro History Week, and over the decades it has expanded to Black History Month. The organization that he founded, we affectionately call ASALH, the Association for the Study of African American Life and History. Every year they have an annual theme, and this year's theme is the Black family: representation, identity, and diversity. And so, Dr. James, can you unpack the impact of the social and racial injustice on the Black family, and how families involved in the press can benefit from it, but also how it can be somewhat traumatizing and detrimental to the Black family as well?
Yes. Thanks for that question. Let me say a few things on that. First, I always go back to the assumption piece, and for, again, shameless plug, I'm sorry, but my book on Black families has a contribution by a couple scholars who did work in Ferguson after the incident there with was it Mike Brown, and when they went into the community, what they were surprised by was the number of conservative Black individuals who were upset that all of this trouble had been brought to their neighborhoods. It wasn't, as many assume, that individuals there were all for the marches. These folks live there.
Right.
They exist in those spaces. Are there things that they were uncomfortable with? Sure, but they have to live there every day. And the attention, the tension, the looting in some cases, brought or shined a light on their community in a way that wasn't so positive, and that impacted their village. And so I say that to say that we have great diversity in Black families, And we don't always consider that. That's the theme of my book. We take a systems view and talk about how there are all sorts of ways of being Black families. And we don't always think about those nuances. And what unfortunately happens is you shut out a segment. Now, anyone who's taken a Black history course probably has heard about the tension between the boy and BTW in terms of, the talents, the 10th versus what's good for the masses. Well, why can't we have both and find somewhere in the middle that we really create that village that's going to help for those of us who have reached the comforts of middle class? We have some resources and understandings that can provide access to those who are still struggling and dealing with some of the more pressing issues of racial injustice on a daily basis. Why can't we collaborate? And I think programs like 100 Black Men are important for building that community, that village that we talk about. It takes a village to raise a child, right? But we can't do that on our own. We really have to think about what partnerships, allyships can we build so that we can each learn from each other and understand where I am. I'm in the suburbs of Cincinnati, but I try to make sure I go down into the city so that I'm understanding what's going on there. When people say, we're dying here, or they say we're struggling here, where are the jobs? Because around me, I'm seeing these, jobs going up all the time, but we don't have a good transportation system. So now I can talk to folks in my place of power to say, hey, it's great that we have those jobs up there, but that 38% poverty among African Americans in Cincinnati is a problem down there. How do we get those folks up here or encourage these jobs to also open up there? And so if we take a systems view, now we're thinking about laws, tax abatements, things of that nature that actually opens up those opportunities so that the people who desire it in those communities can have access to it. That's fairness. That's the opportunity to really get to self-actualization, to reach your full potential. And so I would say that this two-pronged approach that, yes, we have to also talk about things outside our community that are impacting us, white supremacy. We can talk about, law enforcement and those and things if that's what the focus is. But we also have to talk about some things within the community across different spaces because we've spread out. And we see that others of us are either struggling or doing well. And that doesn't always have to create a tension between us, but why can't we reach out and say, how do we help each other so that we can all win?
Thank you, Dr. James. There's a question I kind of want to, you touched on a little bit as far as diversity, especially when we speak about diversity, even within the confines of the Black family or the Black community. There is diversity. We're not all monolithic. We don't all think the same. And sometimes when that goes out to mainstream, those nuances are rarely highlighted. And so one of the questions, and I hope I can present this questions, looking at the Black Lives Matter protests and marches in the US, is there a perceived hierarchy of interest with the Black Lives Matter protests and marches? Can either Dr. James or even Dr. Terry elaborate on which Black Lives Matter protests have been emphasized more over others? For examples, trans Black women, Black men, Black children. And so basically, I believe the question is, are you seeing that there's a hierarchy in whose voice within the diversity of that movement is being more elevated than others?
I'll say something really quick and then pass it over because I know this is my second time talking without letting Jarrett come in here. So I believe Audre Lorde, There's No Hierarchy of Oppressions. Is that the name of the poem? I believe. Why can't we work together? And sometimes that does mean that we're going to prioritize something over the other because maybe it's a more pressing issue or we're in a moment to really be able to make some changes that allow us to see the needle move in a meaningful way in that area. But it doesn't mean that other people aren't hurting or other aspects of the community aren't hurting because of something else, right? And so I think if we clarify what is it we're after, how do we develop a pathway for being able to change in that area. Dr. Terry talked about being very strategic with 100 Black men, that they probably have a particular process for how they're trying to grow those, those warriors, how they're trying to build them up to reach their full potential so that they can be positive and contributing members to society. Well, we can also take that approach with Black families and in the many, you will see nonprofit programs within these communities to work together, but we can sometimes have turf wars because of scarcity of funding, scarcity of people willing to do the work and other things. But I hope that partnerships, being able to articulate what we want and desire out of certain movements so that we can actually see some change and then think through, okay, if we make this change, does it, essentially pull us back in this other area? And those are the complexities that we see and what can sometimes derail some of the movements. So I'll be quiet and pass it over.
Thank you. So yes, I think unfortunately, what we see is what's sensationalized in the media with regards to the question, as I understood it to be asked, which is, are there protests or marches within Black Lives Matter movement that are hierarchical in terms of its visibility or exposure? And so that's what I'm trying to answer. So I think those that are sensationalized, and I don't mean in a positive way, I mean sensationalized by the media in response to someone dying, someone being treated very unfairly, resulting in a death, and therefore shown on TV and or shown on the news or where there's a video. These are the activities that are most exposed. But there's so many other things that are happening within the movement that I feel if we're focused upon, everyone would understand how important the movement itself is. And I don't claim to be an expert in it at all. I'm also following media to see what's happening, but I've trained myself, I think, to see the underlying message and to look at the ticker on national news to see, some of these stories that have come up that relates to, the Nobel Prize that influence those kind of decisions. We're not getting the Nobel Prize because, and I say that Black Lives Matter, because people are being killed, but it seems as if there is a narrative that is associated with, we are highlighting the fact that people are being killed. No, what's highlighted is, again, the focus on equity and opportunity. I think that Black Lives Matters is associated with uncovering and unveiling that there is this this tragedy that exists. And so I would hope that there was a reversal eventually of some of the community-based activity and the strengthening and strategy that has motivated other community leaders to say, Black Lives Matter is not just a painted street. It's that we had enough support and backing to get that street painted. Like that's the thing, is that we are being active, we are participating, we've found the doorway, we've found a seat where we can help make some decisions that provide for equity and equality. That's not technically, or that's not what I see as being advertised or marketed as much, unfortunately. And I can't say, well, I should say that, well, I'm not going to go down that. I'm not going to go that way. I'm just going to say that it seems as if, as is the case for a lot of circumstance, tragedy is what has to, or what has been really bringing things to the forefront. And what's in the wake, though, I think is what is often the most important contribution from the movement. So that's what I'll say on that. I could go down a rabbit hole. I don't want to necessarily do that. So.
Well, I appreciate your perspective, Dr. Terry. And I want to stay with you with this question, because Miami University has a wonderful history of college students, being involved in the movement, protesting, raising their voices, taking action. So I'm curious to know, what are your thoughts on the role of higher education in inspiring emerging leaders to lead with ethics and empathy?
So first of all, I love this question. So first of all, fundamentally, knowing what ethics are, right? I mean, this is one of the places outside of the way that you were brought up, right? The conversations between morality and law and ethics and that kind of stuff, it usually resides in your household. You know, if you have these kind of values, they are usually portrayed to you. Unfortunately, there is offense by which you sway one way or the other. What I appreciate are knowing some of the things that I know. Aristotle versus Kant in a philosophy class, right? And you see, you know, Du Bois, and you know, you see these kind of conversations. What's good for all or what's good for one? These conversations have been going on for ages, not just decades, ages. They're the same kinds in which you have to evaluate your own mind, your own self. Higher education institutions, as is the case for K through 12, allow you a space, particularly in a liberal education setting, allow you the space to explore, first of all, whether you agree with some of these set definitions of ethics, morality, and do they fit your circumstance, and to exchange those ideas and do the one-offs. Yeah, but in this particular case, does this ethic, does this morality artifact fit my circumstance? And you can do that for greater and larger people. You can't have those conversations in a vacuum, in an isolated closet. You need these spaces, which are higher education institutions or K through 12 institutions, to have this kind of discourse. Shameless plug, since we're doing that, the Florida State University has, for example, set out an Institute of Politics. That Institute of Politics is designed to have an opportunity to speak and reach some of the leadership that has had to deal with these kind of issues, all types of issues, not just these that we're talking about today, but then to talk about the ways that they had to think through these and to relive kind of those barriers that were in place and those who helped them through that, and then allow students to come in with different perspectives, to ask those questions. Well, why did you choose this way? And why was this a priority? We have to have these spaces of discourse that encourage free speech, that allow you not to be sanctioned or threatened if you do have an opinion. And for the most part, higher education institutions have been those spaces. It's not to say that protests have not occurred. We know that for sure on college campuses, in university settings, and that some feelings have been rubbed the wrong way. That minimizes the circumstance, but I'm making light of it here. I think that's where the value is. One, being able to communicate and understand perspectives of each other. It's a social environment built on networking and getting to know each other, but then to have the same set of tools, intellectual tools, to be able to communicate and then solve those problems that eventually plague us all. And finally, I take that back to say, again, protests and marches have existed forever. We need to understand why and then be able to respect the fact that there is purpose, that these aren't just settings for violence or disruptive behavior, and that we need to be able to listen. If it's gotten to some of these points, it's because there is a lack of listening and a broken pathway for communication. And so that's why I think higher education institutions specifically matter. To allow for this kind of discourse.
Absolutely. I see higher education as that opportunity to challenge your thoughts, your ideas, because it's a convergence of people from different backgrounds, from different understandings. And that's an opportunity for ideas of what you've been conditioned with to be challenged and either affirm or to misdirect. And so I definitely, and with Dr. James, with you being there with the wonderful legacy at Miami University, I'm definitely interested to know your thoughts on that same topic about how the university are building leaders that exhibit ethics and empathy and things of that nature at Miami.
Yeah, absolutely. It's a setting that, for many in a traditional sense, this is the first time they've been outside of their family and they've heard different messages of how to be in the world and how others are, and they experience that. And that's a part of that student development theory. And I'll tell you, they're on fire, and they let you know when you are not in line with their view. And it takes some empathy and grace to get them to understand that, there's other ways of thinking about this, and you're going to then move out into the world and see that people see this differently. But there are some things we can do to understand, hey, how can we work together? How can we also make sure we meet our role of, giving you the skills and knowledge you need to, develop some, or have a degree bestowed upon you and leave this institution. But our role is to make sure it's safe, that it's a space that they hear multiple perspectives, that they get a chance to interact, that we're providing them with the knowledge and the skills they need so they can be effective when they leave. And I'm proud of, Miami's legacy as a part of that. Are we perfect? No, but we continue to challenge ourselves to be better. And we continue to listen and try to work with partners and make sure we're doing what we need to do to build those students with the human capital to be the next leaders, so that, again, this consistent and long, age old, as Dr. Terry said, fight for ethics and what's the best way to present people with opportunity to excel in the world, that we're contributing in a way that we're supposed to. Now I'll pass it over. I know we're short on time.
Yeah, thank you very much. We are short on time, but we're getting towards the end. I want to provide Dr. Terry and as well as Dr. James an opportunity for any last final take or remark that you will have, and then I will close everything out. So Dr. Terry, are there anything outstanding you want to add to the conversation before we end?
I just want to say that wherever you go, with regards to higher education, take advantage of it. It is not just a workforce development engine. This is where you learn and are able to have critical thought, right? It develops your ability to manage these kind of issues and these skills. We are located in Tallahassee. The 100 Black Men really work together with Florida A&M University. So we have students who are looking at this issue from a particular perspective, and we have those who are in a PWI, which is Florida State University, who have a different perspective or have no perspective at all because they may not have even been exposed. And that could happen at both institutions. But being able to pull those institutions together, and for those people who are out there participating in that, participating in this kind of education. It is not the only kind of education, but it is a valued education that adds value. And so please take advantage of that, especially if you can.
Thank you very much. Dr. James?
I will just say I echo that. Take full advantage of these opportunities to build your human capital so that you can be a positive ambassador. There are families, individuals, communities that need you, that need your skill, that need your level of critical thinking, so that we can, again, create systems that are really promoting opportunities, equitable opportunities for everyone. So thanks for allowing me to speak.
Thank you. Thank you to both of you, Dr. Terry and Dr. James. Just in closing, I just want to encourage everyone who are attending this and that are viewing our conversation. I want to encourage you and empower you to find the necessary resources to develop your understanding, not only about Black history, but also the development of this country and how we've got to where we are with the social realities that we are struggling with here today. It is important to have that understanding and to find your place to make an impact, to improve our society. If we know better, we are instructed to do better. And so I want to thank Miami University for this opportunity. Thank once again, Dr. James, as well as Dr. Terry, and use this as an opportunity to learn and advance us forward. Thank you very much.